goal setting in our context is pretty much defined by the notion of SMART targets. So I'm going to talk to you quite a bit today about the notion of SMART targets. Let's see if we can do this particularly well. I'm going to try something here, see if it works for me. Hey, that worked. I've just found out that I can draw straight lines like this by pressing one key. Wonderful. Now, what are these SMART targets and what principles do we have to apply? Well, I'll tell you something. Generally speaking, I'm not a massive fan of teaching from acronyms. But in this case, I kind of have no choice because the acronym is, in fact, the teaching. So I'm going to write in here for you. Let me put a red in here. I'm going to write in here for you 4 letters, and they are going to represent the word SMART. There you go. Nice and simple. And each of these letters represents a principle. The first principle of which is the idea that targets must be specific. There we go. We've got the word specific. Now, how do we make targets and goals specific? How do we take this SMART principle and apply it naturally? Well, first of all, we can make our goals specific to a sport. For example, if we are taking part in something which is very short duration, high intensity, it may well be that we train in that way, right? Or we might take our goals and we might make them specific to a position in a sport. Imagine a midfield type player in an invasion game like hockey or football or even rugby or netball. I know their positions are called slightly different across those sports, but sort of a mid-court, midfield type player compared to like a goalkeeper style player. They're going to have very different fitness and training goals to one another, right? Because of their role. We can also make training specific to components of fitness. So, for example, someone might target improving flexibility, someone else aerobic endurance, and so on and so on. What about, I've mentioned this one already, making targets specific to an energy system? I mentioned this right at the start there, actually targeting either the aerobic system or the anaerobic systems. And finally, we can make our goals specific to a body part. So our goals might relate to, a rower, for example, strengthening the shoulders, strengthening their back, strengthening their quads. That makes perfect sense, right? What about this M? M refers to, I've already not given myself enough space, the principle of measurable. So let's underline that. We've got measurable here. How do we make our goals measurable? Well, first of all, we make our goals objective. That is a real critical term for us. We want to be able to judge whether our goal has been successful because we can measure it directly. So therefore, we're likely to be talking about a percentage of something or a time for something or a score for something. Think about things especially like fitness test results are extremely good examples of measurable goals. You can imagine, I mentioned flexibility earlier, you can imagine, let's say, a gymnast aiming to improve their sit and reach score by 2 centimeters, say, in 6 weeks. That would be a pretty classic measurable goal. We want our goals to be objective by making them measurable. Our A is what we refer to as attainable. Attainable. Now, to attain something means to get it, right? So it's got to be gettable. It's got to be achievable. We've got to actually be able to do this thing. It's got to be not so wild that we can never achieve that thing. Now, you heard me say 2 centimeters over 6 weeks for our gymnast. That could well be a good example. This goal we have must have the potential to be achieved. And what I mean by that is that it's challenging, but it's attainable and realistic. Now, it's interesting I mentioned the word realistic there, because that is indeed our very next principle or SMART principle. Goals must be realistic. And I'm going to write in here for you, as if it's different to attainable, the idea that the goals must be within reach. You'll probably be realizing here that attainable and realistic are quite closely associated. The goals must be challenging. But appropriate. That might bring a sort of individuality to goals, right? If you're within a team game, for example, the goals for one performer might be quite different to the goals to someone else. And therefore, let's put the idea in here that goals are individualized. All right, so there's some nice ideas about realistic. And finally, folks, we've got the idea that goals must be time-bound. And I've already intimated this in my 2 centimeters improvement on the sit and reach test in 6 weeks by saying 6 weeks, right? We must ensure that our goals have things that we could refer to as deadlines or points that we are going to measure them. And I would say about the measurements, we often will use a pre-training measure, a mid sort of training program measure, and then a post-training program measure, just to see kind of baseline progress and also output. But what we find with goals especially training by fitness-based goals, they're often 4 to 12 weeks in length. So again, let's see if we can give it a simple example. See if I can tick off all of these. So I'm going to think about here's the goal for this person here. Wow, haven't I drawn them well? This person, I'm going to say they are a hockey forward. Let's say they're a hockey forward for argument's sake. So kind of like a striker in hockey. Think about this person as a striker here. Let's give them a hockey stick here. Whoop, there's their hockey stick. Wow, I've drawn something magnificent. I think we'll all agree. So here's my goal. My hockey forward is going to aim to increase power by increasing leg power by improving their vertical jump test score by, let's say, 4 centimeters over 8 weeks. So it's specific to power. It's 4 centimeters. It's attainable and realistic because 4 centimeters is not 24 centimeters. You should be able to do it. And how many weeks did I just say they're going to do it? They're going to do it in 8 weeks. I have achieved this principle of SMART. So I think that's really important to stress. Now, let's finish this off. I just want to talk briefly about the notion of action plans with you. Let's do it in green. Action plans. It's a concept you're going to work with quite a bit. But I want to think about action plans, okay? So when we are talking about action plans, they're going to relate to some kind of activity, okay? So our action plans are going to relate to activity. They're going to relate to health-related exercise, okay? Health-related exercise. Also, guys, and I think this is really important to say, is that we could help it. So the point I'm making here is that our SMART principle could get applied to, as I've said, sort of health-related exercise, training, activity, this sort of thing. But it could also be related to something like diet. What about if our objectives became related to breakfasts? What if they became related to lunches? What if they became related to dinners and snacks? Okay, would you agree with me that we could set targets on that? What about calorific intake over the course of a day, for example? And here again, I think it's really important to stress with our action plans. So they could be related to processes. Okay, they could be related to processes. Let's think about processes as methods of training. Thinking about our interval, thinking about our continuous, thinking about our resistance. And they're related to timescales. Now, we've got that built into our SMART principle, of course, because we've got the idea of time bounding things. We've got the idea of looking at specificity and therefore the method that we would use. So when we talk about action plans, these are some of the factors we're going to look at. We're going to talk about activity and training, activity itself. We're going to talk about diet, and we're going to talk about the actual training model and methodology. And of course, SMART can help us to address all of those.